Folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about honesty, or rather the lack of it, in public discourse. Now, I think that's changing, we're seeing the inkling of some changes in the United States with the effect and the ramifications of the policies of the incoming administration of President Trump. But around the rest of the Western world, the globalists have an iron grip on all mainstream legacy media public discourse, and very little is uttered or mentioned outside of this. What this means, of course, is that we're fed this endless diet of lies and misrepresentations. I mean, they talk about misinformation and disinformation, where they're the ones that are peddling it non-stop 24/7. Now, to highlight that or to represent it, just recently there was a committee that was set up, and I'm not exactly, I think it was a government set them up, which supposedly, this is a globalist controlled government, of course, and it's a committee to set up to investigate why rents, accommodation, rental and mortgage, private residential mortgage prices and house prices are so high. And now, as if you need a committee, and of course there were supposed sages from all around the place that were brought onto this committee, PhD, doctor, so-and-so. Now, when you actually look at the committee, it's made up of, globalist people that exist in the non-meritorious world of globalization. So that all the PhD guys are either, people are making a lot of money out of doing as they're told and producing so-called reports and so on. But as you drill down and you look at the committee, then you look at their researchers and the various other people there. It's just a whole group of leftist activists, black and brown, pro-immigration, mass immigration activists, and the list goes on. I don't think there's an independent voice among them. The only straight white guy in this committee is in receipt of multi-million dollar government contracts to churn out propaganda. So he's not going to bite the hand that feeds him. He's becoming very rich and living a very nice life on telling lies to the public. And I'm a PhD and I'm a professor. So let's just have a look at now. If you look at from the time sort of mass migration began in Australia and the relationship between income, wages, average wages, and house prices. So and an average wage, for example, back in the day was $40,000 a year. For example, it was the average wage, and the average house price was $200,000. So it's 5 times the average wage equals the average house price. Now, the situation today is that around 18 times the average wage equals an average house price or dwelling price, and that dwelling price is there's been a huge increase in the number of units. So whereas it was 75-25 standalone private dwellings, now it's sort of 50-50 private standalone dwellings to apartments. So the mix has changed, and apartments tend to be cheaper than freestanding dwellings, houses. So this is also, there's a number of other shifts going on, and the distance you have to travel now to get into the city from the outlying suburbs where a lot of the growth in apartments has been. In fact, there are now forests of apartments, places that used to be single story, dwellings as far as the eye could see. Now you've got apartment forests, 20 stories high as far as the eye can see. So it's big change. But in spite of all the apartments being built, in spite of or the dwellings being built, most of which are apartments, in spite of all that, house prices have gone from, again, five times the annual wage to buy a house to 18 times the average wage. Now, some would argue, well, look, the most households now have 2 incomes. Therefore, because most households had 1 or 1.5 incomes back when it was 5 times the average wage. Now, given it's 18 there, so really it's 9 times the average wage, given that there's 2 wages coming in. I suppose you could make that argument, but what it means now is that people aren't having children. So the birth rate sort of dropped off substantially. So I don't know if a society gains from that, even if you accept the argument of 9 times the average wage. Now, what this committee got together and they produced their report. Now, nowhere in this report, that I could see, nowhere in it do they mention mass migration. Nowhere. Whereas that is by far and away the biggest driver of price. By far and away the biggest driver. The second, also a very large driver, is allowing offshore buyers to buy up swathes, whole suburbs, swathes of real estate in Australia, and leave a lot of it vacant and empty, or use it as dumping ground for their effectively bringing in illegals under the false pretenses of skilled migration and so on. This also is a huge driver. You've got these multi-gazillionaires from China or India or wherever are just coming in and just buying up house after house after house, and they don't care what they pay. They're just money laundering. So you've got this massive money laundering machine coming through as well, of which the local political class are very much part of. So when you look at the 2 biggest, by far and away, the 2 biggest drivers, mass migration and mass offshore buying of local real estate, there is not one mention anywhere, not one mention anywhere in this vaunted report. The whole report's put together and say, well, look, we don't really know why. It's kind of some sort of magic, or it's a real mystery. We've got no idea, but we do have a solution. There's if you build a shed load more houses, so you've got to build more houses and always keep the amount of houses being built ahead of the migration rate. They don't mention migration, but but the numbers they talk about are clearly saying if 300,000, for example, 300,000 people come in a year in migrants, then we have to build 350,000 houses. And as long as we're staying ahead of the migration rate, there is no problem. Now you could argue, the merits of that, but the point is, and this is where I'm getting, it's dishonest. The cause of the high prices, whether it be of rent or of real estate, the cause is the mass migration. So there's nothing organic, there's nothing natural, there's nothing market driven about it at all. There are no market forces at work here. There is mass dumping of third world people into Australia against the will and the wishes and the desire of the local population, and that's what's driving it, as well as the mass offshore buyers of large amounts of real estate. As I've mentioned this before, there's quite a small beachside suburb. It's only got a few hundred homes in it, and over 10% of those homes are just owned by one Chinese investor. Just one owns 10% of all the property in the neighbourhood. I mean, fuck. So these sort of things aren't being addressed, aren't being looked at, aren't being dealt with, and the reason being is that the political class in Australia, they now derive the majority of their income from real estate speculation. They don't derive their income from their parliamentary salaries or the work they do, the public service sort of work they do. Instead, they're again, the primary part of their income comes from real estate speculation, and this involves millions. There are, and we see this in the United States. How can someone on a $250,000 a year salary be worth $50 million? How do you get that? And it's the same, maybe not to that same scale quite, but it's the same in Australia. So the real estate situation is very much part of the mass enriching of the political class, and so they don't really want it to end. And if they tone it down just a little bit, it's more cosmetic than actual. So but again, we're talking about the dishonesty. Why not just say, just say that clearly that, well, it's mass migration that's caused. Why not say? But they can't. and they won't, and they don't. If anyone does say that, then they're Hitler and they're a Nazi and they're a fascist and so on. So they're very much tied to it. But the economics of it are insane. What it means is that in terms of buying property or even paying rent, there's here 7 years ago, there's a guy actually down the road. He's saying he was paying $320 a week in rent 7 years ago. And now he's paying $800 a week in rent for an unimproved building. So where has that come from? There hasn't been bought and sold since. So the price is being pushed up just through people saying, well, I can get more for that now. There's a shortage of real estate, so I can get more for that. And I remember as a kid, when I was looking at my first places to rent, there was a smorgasbord of places. You didn't have to make an appointment or come on a certain day. The real estate agent would meet you there. They would offer you all sorts of incentives. So very different. There were the eagerness and the keenness to rent property was off the charts. Today it's quite different because there's a shortage. The real estate agents will say, okay, well, there's a half hour, there's 30 minutes, viewing and inspection time on Saturday at 1 o'clock. That's it. If you don't turn, there's no, they're chasing you. It's quite the other way around. And I went to a view just out of academic interest, went to a viewing in the nearest town, an inspection in the nearest town for a, I suppose middle of the road apartment, nothing fancy. And there were just these large groups. I mean, it's a bit deceptive because you don't know how many people are actually the renters or whether it's a collective or what, but there was a large crowd of people there. But the Asians and the Indians and the Arabs, they tend to arrive in large groups with the third and fourth cousins and the whole thing. So you don't know that it's, just be maybe one person, but they bring the whole family along for the ride. And, it's a big day out for them and that sort of thing. So even though you see 100 people milling around, they may only be 10 actual people who are doing the viewing or who want to rent the premises, or they're coming in. Now the other thing that drives rents up is that the Indians and the subcontinent people, Pakistanis, all those sort of people, Chinese too. They'll 20 of them will rent a 2-bedroom apartment. Now that's illegal in Australia, but the authorities just turn a blind eye, but the real estate agents or the property owners, the landlords, that sort of thing, they say, shit, you've got 20 people here, I can charge you extra rent. So the price from you looking the other way on 20 of you being in here. So the rent may be, I'll just use round numbers here, but the rent may be $100 a week, to anybody, say a young white family or something or whatever. But because there's 20 of you here, I'll charge you $200 a week. Now, what that does is it artificially pumps up the rents, the price point of the rents in any given area, which artificially suggests that the rent, that the value of that place in rental terms is now $200 a week, when in reality it's only $100. It's only because there are 20 people living in there. And that's why the landlords, now that should, no one's putting a stop to that. And you see it all over the place. See it even here around the area. You'll see, a Chinese or Indian guy will buy a 5-bedroom house, but there's got to be like 50 fucking people living in that place. Minibuses coming and going all the time, ferrying them out to some labour hire scam bullshit work somewhere. So these sorts of things all need to be. So this is why rents and mortgages are high. It's all artificial. None of it is market forces. None of it is natural. None of it is organic. And it's the Australian citizenry that are suffering, because they now, it used to be 20% of your income. 50 years ago, 20% of your income would be on rent. Now it's 65% of your income is being paid in rent. This is just for an average sort of 2-bedroom apartment or something. So this is the difference, and this is the impact about how rents and mortgages have far outstripped the growth of wages, which means everyone's has a much lower standard of living now than need be. But it's all been forced on them. Again, nothing organic. But you read this report, and there's no mention at all of mass migration, no mention of any of the real drivers. Instead, they just pretend it's a shortage of housing, which is the government's fault. You just got to build more houses, and then there's lip service being paid. But even this, you think, would be concerning, because there's a number of green belts and forest areas around the bigger cities that I think are important. And the talk is, well, why don't we just pave that over and just throw more forests of apartments in there, so we can get even more people in from third world countries. It's a terrible mess, and we can only wish and hope that it's going to stop soon. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.